All right. Well, that's not it. That's not it. That's not it. Welcome back to Black Bear News, where everything is connected. What's going on? How you doing? Greetings to everyone, and welcome. We're live on YouTube, Rockfin, call in, and on Twitter. You can watch the show on Twitter. All right. So, just have a couple of things to cover today. I'm still experiencing some very harsh schedule issues, so that's why the show is a little bit later today. But hopefully tomorrow we'll be back on time at 12 noon Pacific Daylight Time, which isn't much longer, right? Got a couple more weeks of daylight savings, and then we go back to regular time. And we go back to the very dark evenings, very early sunsets, which always produces a bit of melancholy. It is what it is. I do enjoy the cooler temps of the wintertime. I don't enjoy the seasonal depression that comes along with it, and it is a bit of seasonal depression. It's a combination of being cold and dark and just the time of the year. I don't know what. It just sends me into kind of a tailspin. All right. And we haven't even gotten to global warming yet. Anyways, Jeff Berardelli, I'm a child of the 70s. Just how warm was September 2023 compared to a 30-year baseline centered around that? Here you go. I think this is compared to 1950 to 1980 baseline. So, roughly 50 years ago. And we're mostly 2, 3, and 4, and even warmer than that. 5 degrees hotter than in some places. Obviously, the global temperature is an average. And you have stuff like this happening here. But I mean, that seems to be an outlier compared to everything else around it. These little outliers compared to everything else around it. But that's where we're at. You know, when you're at the shopping mall and you're at the shopping mall and you're trying to find the Macy's or the J.C. Penney or the hot dog on a stick, and you're like, where is it? Where's the food court? I need to get me a hot dog on a stick ASAP. And you're like, where is it? And there's a big board and it says, you are here. Well, in the context of global warming, we are here. So get yourself a hot dog on a stick and enjoy that before that is a serious delicacy. Anyways, what's up, Rockman people? How you doing? Everybody over here? Anybody? Anybody? I see some. I see people there. I see commenters. I see watchers. I see viewers. I see first responders. William, always. How you doing? This is from Peter Dines. September 2023, which is September 2023 was 1.75 C above Earth's pre-industrial average. Why am I laughing? I don't know. When things are so ridiculous that they just are off the charts, out of control, I tend to laugh. I tend to start laughing. Anyways, 1.75 C. Oh, that's a... And considering the direction we're going, that's closer to 2C than it is to 1.5. I know it's right in the middle. I understand how math works. But if something's going in this direction, which is up, I'd say that 1.75 is more like a 2 than like a 1.5. Earth's pre-industrial average. So, we're closing in on 2 degrees, 2C, folks, which is 0.5 C warmer than the previous hottest September. If that doesn't concern you, it may be worth examining the scientific consequences that it will bring. Jack Lowe says, or even just the consequences for daily life, which can be very simple and very sudden. Matsy says it's fine. As the oil companies say, the overwhelming evidence has shown climate change is real for decades, and no reasonable person would deny that. Anyways. Pardon my scrolling. I'll pardon your trolling if you pardon my scrolling. It is interesting. Climate experts sacked after refusing flight to Germany over carbon emissions. Moral heroes all around us. Do I have the courage? Bionic Man asks himself. Well, you're the Bionic Man, Steve Austin. You better have the courage. Yeah, climate expert fired for refusing to fly to Germany because of carbon emissions. Lots of fame and fortune there, huh, Judith Curry? All the fame and the fortune these climate scientists are receiving. Such fame, such fortune. Oh, I'm fired? Shoot. Because I'm protesting climate change. I'm outspoken about how bad climate change is. I got fired. Good times, right? Fame and fortune, huh? Huh? What a ultramaroon. Judith Curry is such a moron. Sorry. Oh, I'm going to stop that. These climate experts are seeking fame and fortune. It's like, dude, climate scientists are the most just absolutely sidelined, belittled. I mean, nobody wants to listen to a climate scientist. Nobody knows any climate scientist by name. I would love to interview Judith Curry and ask her, like, who's a famous climate scientist that everybody knows of? I mean, maybe Michael Mann, but like, only famous for being bad at climate science. But seriously, there is no fame or fortune in climate science or being a climate communicator. You mostly get fired. You mostly get told to go away. You mostly get arrested, maybe if you protest somewhere. That's not, let me know when the fame and fortune kicks in there. So stupid. Gian, Gianluca Grimalda says he was fired when he refused to return at short notice. You know, all the fame and fortune that I receive for talking about climate change. All the other like super famous YouTubers out there talking about climate change. Oh, there aren't any? Okay, then maybe your point isn't a point. But you wouldn't, if you were on the right or if you didn't know anything about climate change whatsoever and you were just kind of like not even present for it, you might go, yeah, these climate people are out there just super famous, making money, fortune. Oh, you got to be like, you got to be missing a couple tools from the shed to even think that. Anyways, Gianluca Grimaldi says he was fired when he refused to return at short notice from the Solomon Islands, a research trip by plane. Climate researcher who refused to comply with his employer's demand to fly at short notice back to Germany from the Solomon Islands says he has been fired from his job. Grimaldi is still waiting in Bougainville for a cargo ship set to depart on Saturday to begin his return journey to Europe after 6 months investigating the impacts of climate breakdown and globalization on the island's inhabitants. Grimaldi, who has avoided flying for more than a decade, said he had promised the people he met during his field work, some of whom had been displaced by rising waters, he would minimize his carbon emissions on his return journey. But he faced a dilemma 2 weeks ago when his bosses at the Kiel Institute for Worldwide Economy, gave him a deadline to return to his desk. That's because the economy is more important than the climate. When you actually get down to it, the economy is way more important. Being at your desk at the Kiel Institute is way more important than actually caring about the climate. But, you know, as long as you think we care and stuff. Gave him a deadline to return to his desk that meant he had to travel by air or face losing his job. He refused, and on Wednesday he said they informed him his contract had been terminated. Grimaldi said, IFW seems to ignore that we have entered the Anthropocene era and that the most important Earth ecosystems are close to collapse, if not already collapsed. In this era, wasting 4.5 tons of CO2, the difference between the flight emissions and the slow travel emissions, to comply with the absurd request to be physically present in Kiel at such short notice is morally unacceptable and epitomizes the ultimate privilege of the global elites. It is the sign that IFW is still living in an era that will be wiped out by the incoming climate collapses. Sounds like this climate scientist is pretty in touch with where we're going. Sounds like he's pretty in touch with where we're going. He intended to appeal against the IFW's decision, but he added in this case, the initial impression is that IFW actions are justified legally. A spokesperson for IFW said that it stood by its policy of not discussing or commenting on staff issues in public. In general, the Institute encourages and supports its staff to travel climate friendly. The spokesperson said, "We are committed to do without air travel in Germany and in other EU countries as far as we can. When flights are unavoidable, we pay to atmosphere to offset flight emissions through climate protection projects." Great. We all know how well those work. We all know how, above the board and actually functioning climate offsets are. So, you just ease up your conscience there. Sorry. Anyways. Well, the man, he had an ethical boundary that he was not willing to cross, and then so he held the line. Very good. Let's keep going. This from Steve Austin, Bionic Man. Seems like this little tweet should be getting a lot more attention. Basically, the EIA is projecting climate collapse with this one. In most IEO 2023 cases, we project that global energy-related CO2 emissions will increase through 2050 under current laws. So there is no net zero happening under the current trajectory, current laws, current practices, current business as usual. Let's read a little more about this. Note that in these charts, the dark line represents, sorry, I'm reading this, the reference case, and the gray area represents the range of side cases. So that's the range. But the range, except for pretty much in here, this one, the bottom end of the range says stay the same. Energy-related CO2 emissions, world. Primary energy use, world. And GDP, world. Okay, so the only one of these that looks like it might, there's none that are going down. One that stays level, which is CO2, energy-related CO2 emissions. And that's like the best case scenario. Is staying the same. Maybe a little bit of a decrease there, tiny. But everything else in this chart is going up. And this here, the GDP, that's the one that you should pay attention to. Because as long as this GDP is going up, all this is going to go up, and all this is going to go up. As it stands now, as the economy stands now, the very use of money, of a particular unit of money, represents CO2 use. Just anything you buy or sell or use money for, every, I forget what the equation is, but every dollar, every pound, every kroner, every yen represents a certain amount of CO2 usage. So if the world economy is going up, so is the CO2 usage. Like, period. It's period. They go on to say, we expect non-fossil fuels will meet the bulk of new energy demand through 2050, but that growth is not sufficient to decrease global energy-related CO2 emissions in most cases under current laws and regulations. That's a little bit confusing. They're saying non-fossil fuels will meet the bulk of new energy demand. So whatever new demand, forget about the old demand. The old demand is still using CO2, right? New demand will be met with non-fossil. Could be. I don't think so, though. And as they go on to say, that growth is not sufficient to decrease global energy-related CO2 emissions. So, I mean, and this is kind of they're talking about I guess is referenced in the other graph I was talking about. Best case scenario, CO2 emissions plateau or stay flat till 2050. And what that means is not even net zero, not that they stop, nothing about it. It means that we keep pumping out CO2 at the current rate until 2050. So until for 30 years, we're locked into the same amount of CO2 emissions every year. That's what that means. At the best case scenario. Totally saving the earth, guys. We're going to do it. We're doing it. Under current laws, liquid fuels consumption, including biofuels, increases through 2050. The biofuels are, that's not going to work. The shift to renewables to meet growing electricity demand is driven by regional resources, technology costs, and policy. Get this, total electricity generation worldwide increases 30% to 76% relative to 2022. Renewables and nuclear supply 54% to 67% of the total demand in 2050. So it's like nuclear stays kind of flat. Solar, coal staying flat. Wind going up, solar going up, natural gas, somewhat flat, but maybe going up. Anyways. All right. There you go. Rich Diana. It's interesting. Yeah, 3C. Well, some people say that 3C is the extinction event. 3C is not the tipping point. Actually, in historical climate science, 1C was the tipping point. 1C was the tipping point at which we could not. That was the old IPCC target. 1C. Couldn't get to 1C because that would be the tipping point that pushed us into irreversible climate catastrophe. And then they were like, how about 2C? How about 1.5? We must not pass this guardrail of 1.5. Well, we're done. That's done. We done past it. And now we're headed to 2C. So, I mean, if you're going to historical climate science, we already passed the tipping point, and we're going to 2 and 3 and 4. And we're kind of screwed because then they said, well, 2C isn't the one that we have to pass, and then if we pass that, then all is lost. And we're getting closer to 2C, so it's not looking good. It does not look good. I can tell you that much. It looks real bad. All right. I'm going to try and cover some other things before I get out of here, guys. I'm not really going to be able to do much past 1, and I apologize. I'm really trying to juggle quite a few things. Well, this is interesting. John Kirby admits that funding for Ukraine is coming to the end of the rope. It appears the U.S. are diverting their funding away from Ukraine, and the Biden regime have quietly accepted that Ukraine is a lost cause. And this has been kind of going around for a little while. That Ukraine was not going to be. Isn't going anywhere good. And so he is admitting that they're gonna. The end of the funding is looking. The end of the funding is coming soon. Looks like Israel was the off ramp they needed. Maybe, and I thought about that too. It was a great diversion. It really has taken up all of the news space, almost, so much so that it's hard for me to, just everything Israel Gaza for the last 5 days, and just everybody's opinion and all the think pieces and everything Israel Gaza has just made me like, oh, I'm overwhelmed with it. But it definitely has like pushed Ukraine completely off of the headlines, which is maybe what they wanted, or maybe just is very useful. I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm not going to jump to any what they wanted. Strike that, reverse that. Okay, retract that. I don't know if anybody wanted this or not. I'm saying it's very useful to them. We'll just leave it there.
Coming near to the end of the rope. Ukraine funding, we're coming near to the end of the rope. I mean, today we announced $200 million, and we'll keep that aid going as long as we can. But it's not going to be indefinite. So, are we moving with a sense of alacrity? Absolutely. I couldn't give you a date certain on the calendar.
Can I follow up on that?
Ukraine.
Yeah. So he's saying it's coming to an end. And people have been calling this for a long time. Meaning at least 6 months, that they were saying like there's going to be, they're already preparing to jump ship on this endeavor, which will be interesting because it's going to leave Ukraine in a space of having to, or being allowed to, negotiate some peace, which would be great, right? Who knows? I cannot predict the future, but it seems like there have been quite a few people who have suggested that we have a peace negotiation and have been instrumental in trying to devise ways to have a peace negotiation. And it seems like the West, led by the U.S., have said, no, we don't, that's not what we want. We insist. Well, there cannot be, any, we don't negotiate with terrorists, right? Something. But maybe now they might be like, well, which would really suck for Ukraine, right? If they were like, if the U.S. was suddenly like, well, that's really not any of our concern. I mean, it's not really our business, which is perfectly in their playbook, right? Totally in their playbook. And I probably should just leave it at that. I'm probably not even going to go any more into that. Or maybe I'm going to have to leave YouTube. Maybe I will. You know what, YouTubers? We had us a little climate change talk. And I'm going to jump off YouTube and do a couple minutes on Rockfin. All right. Y'all know how to support the show, right? We got these links. They're below the video. You can support the show down there. If you like the show being here every day. All right. So see you on Rockfin.